little bit about the history of the conflict, and then I will mention a little briefly also about how the referendum went. But I will leave the task of the current issues and the specific details of the referendum process to John Katunga and Peter Quaranto, since they've been in the field following the events there very closely. The history of the conflict, basically, as you know, Sudan is the largest country in Africa. It's something that I've always prided myself with, coming from the largest country in Africa, at least until July 9, 2011. And the population of the country is estimated at 43,9,309,598. Sorry, 43,939,598. And it's multicultural, multiracial, multilingual, and multi-religious, with around 597 different ethnic groups who speak over 400 different languages. So it's a very, very diverse country. Some have even called it as a small-scale representation of Africa, the diversity that is represented in the African continent. So the Arab population in Sudan comprises 39%. The Negroid Africans comprise 52%, and other comprise 9%. Sunni Islam makes the majority. It's 70% of the population. African traditional religions, 25%, and the remaining 5% is Christianity, mainly situated in the south. But these statistics are from 1981. There are no recent statistics, so I'm guessing that the number of Christianity has exponentially grown.
We supported the whole process of referendum. We need to understand that the referendum itself was a provision of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which has a process that started with the census in 2008. We had to know the number of people and the voters. And then we went to general elections in 2010 in April, and that's where the legitimization of the leaders who will go to the referendum was achieved, both in the north and in the south. Because separating a country is the first time we have seen this on the continent, and probably in the world, where the people divide themselves and agree to that. So they needed really huge legitimacy for those who take such a responsibility, and the elections were prepared in the process. And then the referendum was to now agree if the unity will remain or they will separate. The things that they'll be discussing that are pending are many. The first one is the border demarcation. As you see the map there, you have the blue. That's the Southern Sudan, then the new country, that will be a new nation, South Sudan. I hear the name will be South Sudan Republic, Republic of South Sudan. We don't know yet. Probably that's what will be. Then you have the green there, it's Darfur. And then the brown is the North Sudan. And then we have the pink there, the Southern Kordofan and Blue Nile. And then the yellow in the middle is Abyei. Those areas on the border are contested. And that's why we have most of the oil concentrated, especially where the yellow thing is. And those, I'm sure my brother will talk more about that. And these borders have never been agreed upon. The waters, the water of the Nile. The Nile comes from the south and goes to the north. And you know how crucial that water is for Egypt and for Sudan. There is a treaty in 1929 that gave 90% of the waters of the Nile to Egypt and Sudan. Now, between Egypt and Sudan, there was another division. Sudan has 18%, and the rest was for Egypt. Now that Sudan is divided, who takes what of the 18%? That's internally. But internationally, the riparian countries are pushing to have also access to that water, a larger share. for fairness. They produce all the water, but the water all is utilized by Sudan and Egypt. And still they want development. The people are hungry in the riparian countries, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and other countries. They're building dams. The dams are tampering on the flow of water. So that's creating a mega problem that is regional, that the South Sudan find itself in after the referendum. And then we have this big problem of development and poverty that really require, I might say, really a Marshall Plan to develop Sudan, because it's a country that needs, as I said, construction, not really reconstruction as such.
In the run-up to the referendum, the U.S. and our international partners mobilized an effort to push for the referendum to be held on time and peacefully, with the view that if that didn't happen, the likelihood of a return to civil war within Sudan was significant. And so in September, October, the Obama administration, with President Obama personally engaged, made a decision that we were going to ramp up our efforts to push for the referendum. The administration invested a great deal of diplomacy. The president himself was being briefed weekly on the situation in Sudan, which is fairly significant for an issue like this. The president made personal phone calls to Sudanese leaders and participated in an event at the UN General Assembly on Sudan where he called world leaders together to focus their attention on the referendum. And the president's entire national security team was invested as well, making phone calls, in some cases making trips, and engaging personally with Sudanese and regional leaders to push for the referendum to take place. At the same time, the State Department and USAID were providing technical support for the process to happen. So we were doing work to procure materials, to train staff, and to deploy observers. And just to note, one of the most significant things about the referendum that, again, is not that well reported was how well observed it was. It was one of the most observed electoral processes in modern history, which helped to ensure that the credibility of the referendum is at a certain standard and that the North would not be able to, or North or anyone for that matter, would be able to call into question the credibility of the outcome. Most people thought that a peaceful, on-time referendum for Southern Sudan on January 9th was impossible, both from a technical standpoint in terms of the logistics of what it would take to hold the referendum, and from a political standpoint in terms of the political capital that would have to be expended in order for the North and the South to reach agreements to allow the referendum to happen. And yet, despite all those predictions, it did happen, which is a tremendous achievement, first and foremost to the Sudanese parties themselves, to the Southern Sudan Referendum Commission, the 11,000 referendum workers that were part of this process, and obviously all the people who participated. Is also a credit to the international community, which made a tremendous effort over the 5 or 6 months in the run-up to the referendum to call attention to this issue, to put pressure on the parties, and to bring them to the table. My colleagues up here have mentioned the challenges for Southern Sudan and for Northern Sudan are enormous. The referendum was not the last chapter of the CPA, and it's certainly not the last chapter for North-South relations. In the run-up to the referendum, both the North and the South determined that it was in their strategic interest to go forward with the process and to make efforts to try to avoid war. There's nothing to say that they're going to continue to find it in their strategic interest to cooperate and to reach the agreements that they need to between now and July and beyond. And our task as the international community and people who care about Sudan is to do what we can to continue to reiterate to them the importance of doing what they can to avoid war.